Some of you may already know that the village of Kiryas Joel is seeking to annex 507 acres of land from the town of Monroe. What you may not realize is how serious and significant this battle is for those of us who live in Orange and Rockland counties. Annexation will benefit only one community, while it threatens the infrastructure, environment, and quality of life for the rest of our region. The upcoming November 4th election is hugely important for the good people of Orange and Rockland counties. We need to elect candidates who oppose this annexation.
The Hasidic life revolves around family and children. My grandparents have 13 children. They're Auschwitz survivors. Every child that was born was a defeat to Hitler. And this is what is the driving force behind growth.
Hello and welcome back to this channel. My name is Frida Weisel, and on this channel, I explore topics related to Judaism, New York City's Brooklyn, and my specialty, Hasidic Judaism, which is the world that I come from. I actually grew up in a very special place, the village of Kiryas Joel, and I've not covered it much on this channel. So I'm really excited to bring you, for my long-form interview series, a discussion about the documentary titled City of Joel. My guest today is Jesse Sweet, an Emmy Award-winning documentary director and producer whose work includes recently Netflix Killer Robots, which explores the rise of artificial intelligence in the military. Before that, he directed The Murders Before the Marathon, Parts Unknown with Anthony Bourdain, Years of Living Dangerously, Death Row Stories, and more. Jesse directed the documentary City of Joel, which follows a small-town political battle between the ultra-Orthodox Hasidic sect and their secular neighbors over the course of 4 years. Welcome, Jesse. I actually wanted to start by asking you when you were first in the village of Kiryas Joel and what you remember your impressions were of this very unique village.
Let me just back up for a second and say why I went there. So I'm Jewish. I grew up kind of conservative Jewish in Western Massachusetts, outside Springfield. Had my bar mitzvah at Temple Bethel in Springfield, and moved to Crown Heights about 16 years ago, and was very kind of interested by the Hasidic population here. And in a lot of ways, I felt, a connection and a kinship because all four of my ancestors had immigrated from Eastern Europe and were Orthodox Jewish in the late 19th, early 20th century. But on the other hand, I kind of didn't really understand a lot about the Hasidic culture and community, and started sort of thinking about, well, documentary is a great way to explore that because that's what documentaries do. They get into other worlds and help you learn about them and see them. And so myself and my producing partner, Hannah Olson, were sort of trying to develop something about sort of how do Hasidic communities flourish in New York City. And while we were sort of like meeting some different subcultures, like skateboarding Hasidic Jewish people, and, a lot of people we were talking to were like, oh, I came from Kiryas Joel and left. And we were kind of interested in this place that had, was described to us by a lot of people as this sort of like very pure manifestation of the Hasidic sort of philosophy and cultural values. And so we're like, well, rather than looking at people who are on the edge of like one foot in the secular world and one foot in the Hasidic world, like maybe it's more interesting to go to the place that's the purer form of it. And so I think the first time we went up there was actually on Shabbos. We didn't really know much, like we kind of had, talked to some people who were from there and gotten some background information, but it's not like we went in there with like an entree into that world. And so we were just kind of wandering around. And we're really struck by, it's like, as I'm sure it's like how it was just like shut down. Like, first of all, we as soon as we stepped foot in, we felt alien, like we were completely this outsider entity, and everyone sort of would stop and look at us. And then the way that it was just like, there were no cars, it was just, it was like stepping out of, New York City and going up there was like going into this, wildly different community. And then, seeing the kind of masses of people heading towards the shul and coming out of the shul. It was like very striking, the group dynamic there and the conformity that is apparent on your first visit.
Did you have a camera on your first visit?
No, we didn't bring a camera. We were just up there and we started talking to some people. I'd say that one of the challenges of the film is like, there were a lot of people who would sort of like pull us aside and be interested in explaining things to us. Like, oh, you don't understand. Here's how this works. Here's why this street's closed. Here's why this is happening and that's happening. And then we'd be like, oh, great, can we have you say that on camera? And no, I don't, because a lot of people didn't want to, I think, be out there and be like seen as like speaking on behalf of the Satmar or speaking on behalf of the village. So there was like a ton of great background information we were getting. Some of the safety and security people were actually very helpful and open to, kind of like giving us some background information. And then so that was the first time. And then I think the first time we went up with a camera was on Purim.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
When did you go to Max Hauer's house?
Sure. We didn't know him then.
Got it.
We met him after this. So the first time we went up with Purim, basically people were like, oh, it's a good time because like there's a lot more kind of like people coming in houses and going out houses, and like people were more willing to be open about things, which was true. And so we went up there with cameras on Purim, and on that day, people were like, come on in. It's like there was a much more kind of like welcoming, boisterous mentality on that day. And so we went up on Purim, and then I don't know if it was there are like two early things I remember with Purim, which, as you know, is just like, there is like an ecstatic emotion, on that day where everyone's, like come up the trucks and the people and the dancing, and you go in the house and they're bringing the speakers. And then Lag Bomer was one of the other early times we went up there. And by that time we had met Max, and Max was a great, Max is in the film, and his father and his whole family were extremely welcoming. And he was one of the real people who sort of like was like my rabbi on this. He sort of was one of my great educators, who taught me a lot. And I think he kind of like on Lag Bomer kind of like told us where to go and what to do. And then, slowly was like explaining to us like the rhythms of the year and like some interesting things that we'd want to get. So sometime between Purim and Lag Bomer, we met Max.
Got it. Max, by the way, lived on my block when we were children. So a part of what's interesting, to me in the film is to see many people that I recognize. But I want to talk about, besides for the gossipy part of like the people I know who's who when there's a documentary about the place you grew up, I want to talk about the meta-narrative of the documentary. Before I do want to play the Lag Bomer clip because it's a very, very beautiful. Is that the one? Is that the scene you filmed that year, or was that?
Yes.
Okay. It takes your film out, right?
It's like the end of the film.
It's the end of the film.
First thing we filmed is the end of the film.
Okay. Is that like a thing?
Just like a nice kind of, there's a rhyme to it, but no, it's not. It wasn't intentional.
It wasn't intentional. Okay.
At the end, we realized, because we start with a big kind of crowd scene, at the Armory, and it felt like there was a nice kind of resonance to start with a big crowd scene and end with a similar scope.
Yeah, I did notice that. Oh, here it is. It's very, very striking footage. It's a very spectacular moment. It's like the whole community's out.
It is, and that's what strikes you is like, I think as someone who comes from, doesn't come from that world, and comes from a very sort of secular, multicultural background. I think one of the curious questions about a place like Kiryas Joel is, how is it maintain the sort of homogeny and the isolation, where there is such a strong sense of group identity to this one thing, and there's not like a kind of like bleeding over of like, we're going to have a little bit of popular culture and a little bit of ours, but it's like there's this kind of purity to it. And I think you realize, like, when you're at moments like this, like there is this sort of like just this enormous like thrill almost and rush of being in this crowd where everyone wants to be in this one place and is, kind of like has the same goal and vision and sense of who they are. And so they like being there, it's palpable, that sense of like, oh yeah, there is this sort of like intoxicating side of the sort of, that group, being part of this massive group.
Yeah. I think especially on the male side of things, I watch these things from a very gendered perspective.
Yes.
And although a lot of women find it very meaningful and very special, and I loved about the documentary that we got to see the woman's perspective. For me, these events are they seem very exciting for men, and they do tell a part of the story of what is the appeal, what is so special, what does this society give people. It's not just a bunch of restrictions. But I want to talk about the story of the film, which is essentially about the battle to annex property, right? Do you want to summarize what happens?
Sure. So this, and again, we didn't go up there knowing this was going to, like, we were kind of went up there interested in, the life of the village, and then quickly found that there was this tension, which kind of gave we thought a good narrative structure to the film, to bring up a lot of these questions we were interested in. Is that when the village was incorporated in the 1970s, it was a couple hundred square acres, and there were 100 some odd families who went up there with the Rebbe, and they've sort of slowly grown over time. But at its current, when we were filming at that point, it was about a little over a square mile, and there was about 25,000 people living there, and they have large, numbers of children, and they, there was a real pressure to have additional housing as, people wanted to either move out of Brooklyn for various reasons, move up there. And the problem is, and this is like, it gets very complicated and take a while, it's a village within a town. And so the town sets the zoning ordinances, and the zoning ordinances, I believe, were, because they're trying to maintain a kind of rural setting, I think it was one house per quarter acre was at the time. And so what they wanted to do was, because the land, so Hasidic developers were buying farmland, but they couldn't build enough housing on it because it was outside of the jurisdiction of Kiryas Joel, so that the other parts of the town could set the zoning laws. And so they wanted to basically, the land that had been bought, bring it into Kiryas Joel's village, so then they could rezone it, and they could have 16 dwellings per quarter acre as opposed to one, so that they could have the high density housing that they needed to sustain the growth. So it's really, but becomes this kind of proxy for like larger tensions, because I think some of the pushback against the annexation proposal were people who felt afraid, anxious, like their lifestyle, the kind of not Hasidic neighbors, was being sort of eaten into by their neighbors who they felt were different than them, and changing the culture and the character and all these different aspects to it. So, and there were environmental issues and these different things. So it becomes this sort of like small town political battle over, is KJ going to grow or not, essentially?
Well, inevitably it has to grow. There's no option around it. But the issues that result from the growth, which feel in some ways similar to gentrification. There's the taking over a neighborhood and changing it. I think these are very complicated issues. And I felt it in the film, although I mean, it's obvious that the Hasidic community, I think, they ultimately need their territory. And actually, the village of Kiryas Joel is now town of Palm Tree. So
Right.
they no longer have this issue of being under the zoning laws of the town of Monroe. They're their own town. And that happened after the documentary.
That was yeah. Palm Tree was like a year after the documentary, and as you know, there are now other sort of villages that are becoming majority Hasidic in the area as well. And I think you're right. It is inevitable in a way. It's like a demographic fact that if you have one community where an average family has 8 kids and one where an average family has less than 2, the community with the 8 kids, over time and having kids at a younger age is just going to become the dominant force in the area, and they need places to live and they need housing and they need to meet their things. So it's inevitable, but I think there's, this backlash that people have when they see their community changing, where they look for levers to try to throw the brakes on.
There was a lot of animosity. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to play the scene where everyone comes together at the crux of the film. In my girls' school, yeah, the Paradise Girls' School, right? It was at Paradise. It looks like Paradise.
It was at Paradise, yeah.
Yeah. Everyone comes together, and on the one side, I see my father and all the Hasidic men, and on the other side,
Which one's your dad? I didn't know your dad was there.
Yeah. I don't know if you know my father. My father is Meyer Wertheimer. He's
I know who he is. I don't know if I've ever met him, though.
He's in the film. You probably don't know every
the
person.
film?
I have no idea. I didn't ask him.
I'm curious. Do you know anything more? And just before, have you heard much like what people in the village think about the documentary?
I don't think people really have much of an interest.
Yeah.
I think people don't. It's my feeling that people don't love the housing discussion, that there are some
Right.
discussions they're more open to being interested in. This is something that it's a dilemma. It doesn't
Yeah.
excite a sense of, well, we're right, or
Right.
it's a very
But they need to do it.
Yeah.
They're obligated, but not.
yeah. It's like
I
we
think-
need this property. Housing prices are so expensive. There's nowhere to live. There's nowhere to go. But
Yep.
you also don't want to make enemies.
Right. Of course. And who wants to have that kind of minutia, which can seem petty or something like that, be broadcast. But we tried not to get into the petty parts of it and keep it onto the culture. But
Yeah, I'm wondering now after I publish this, I bet I'm going to get some interesting comments and people are going to say what they think.
I know. Please let me know.
Do you want to know?
I've heard from some Satmar who've left the village. Someone be like, "Oh, I grew up there, but I lived in Los Angeles." People like that have contacted me to say they like the film, but I haven't heard much from people, just random people in the village.
Yeah, I've heard people frustrated with the insinuation in the documentary that people from the community had sent nasty mail to the
Right.
woman who we see who's advocating against the annexation. It's like
Yeah.
she is making these claims, but are they substantiated? Did that really happen? And so on.
Right. No, I know. It was. I mean, these are tough things. That how much do you put in, how much not to put in.
Yeah.
But it felt like we needed, some instance to show. But we were trying to balance both sides' perspective and play it down the middle. But I know.
I guess that was her experience. That's what we see, that she feels like she's being
Right.
targeted. Yeah.
Right.
So let me play the culmination of all of this, the fighting, which we're watching as the documentary progresses, and we watch the seasons and the families and different people. We're understanding this tension as the community's trying to expand, but the neighbors are saying you're taking over our community, and that tension culminates with a vote. Can you explain the vote before I play it? Who's
Yeah.
voting?
So these are the leaders of the town of Monroe, which is the village is within the town, And so basically the town is voting on whether to allow the farmland and different properties that's been bought to be annexed under the jurisdiction of the village of Kiryas Joel.
I see. So they're like elected officials?
They're elected officials from the town of Monroe.
Got it. Okay. So let me play
If
near there.
effective, then the national elections are in many cases.
I love the way the kids are staring.
That can send shock waves throughout your region.
Oh, here we go. It's wild. You know what's really wild to me is this contrast of America in this one room singing the national anthem, and on the one hand the Hasidic men. It's all so American, just the very contrast of all of it.
It's so American, and this is a moment I think is like very interpreted very differently depending on who the audience is. Because like I've talked to some people from the village, not from Kiryas Joel, like the outside the village, who see this like, oh, it was this great moment. We all came together and we sang "God Bless America," and they take pride in it. Being in the room, I remember thinking it seemed like a very hostile move, right? It seemed like waving that flag in the face of the Hasids, to me, seemed to say, you're not one of us. And so I think, I assume that's how a lot of Hasidic people felt, that it was like sort of like flag waving as a form of like, ostracism. And so I think it's like perceived, like that's a moment that I think for Hasids is perceived as like, this hostile move by their neighbors, whereas I think the people from United Monroe view it as like, oh, we're coming together to defend ourselves.
And the very fact that this moment occurs and there are all these clashes is, of course, so American. The fact
Right.
that this entire electoral process with all its flaws is happening. What happened? What were the outcomes of the vote?
So the outcome was it was sort of like a split the difference. It was, I think they got basically half the land annexed approximately, or some large percentage of it. So they didn't get everything. So I think they were really looking for a compromise. So it's like, we're not going to give you all and let you annex all the land, but we're going to let you annex enough of it that you can build some housing. And so that's why I think out of this then became, the city of Palm Tree to try to avoid these problems so they could have more self-control going forward.
What was the mood after the vote in the room? How did people feel?
The mood after the vote was definitely the Satmar felt like they won.
Got it.
And the neighbors, the United Monroe, felt like they lost.
I see.
Like, I think the fact that even though it was half, it was still like a big enough chunk of land that it felt like a victory for the Satmar.
And essentially giving any piece of land, I think, is a reminder for the neighbors that this is a growing community, right? Which inevitably
Right.
it'll continue to grow. A lot of the discourse around the Hasidic community in the more reductive narratives, like in maybe online forums, is about how they have all the power to control the elected officials and they get to do whatever they want. But there's a lot of nuance. The elected officials are trying to juggle their constituencies. What did you see, for instance, here, these elected officials who were making this call, what did you think they were calculating, or where were they coming from?
Yeah, I mean, I do think I think part of their calculus was like, they're going to be more Satmar. And if we don't expand the community and allow Kiryas Joel to grow, then they're going to move into other communities. And it's going to be maybe a less controlled growth. Like, at least this will allow it to be a more controlled situation where they'll grow in a way, but it's like at a controlled place. Whereas if they don't have that place, then they're just going to have to like kind of move all over the place, and it could in some ways be a more disruptive type of growth pattern. So I do think they were just like very real, reality minded, that it's like there's this growth going on, and how are we going to create space for it in a way that feels more manageable, as opposed to just, if it feels like they're just clamping down on the Satmar, then there's going to be pockets of growth in places that might be even more disruptive.
Interesting. Did the politicians pay a price for their vote? Or do you even know?
Yeah.
Like, were there consequences?
So I mean, the guy Harley Doles, who's the sort of like leader of the lead elected official in Monroe, he actually, I'm trying to think if he was elected. He passed away shortly after we finished filming. And I know that I think he might have been voted. I think he didn't run for office again because it was such a controversial thing that he. So I don't know if he lost or if he just chose not to run, and then he shortly after passed away. But I think for the other ones, there's a lot of Satmar voters up there, and so I don't know if that's a good question that I don't know off the top of my head. The other ones besides Harley, what happened to them?
Remember. There's the very famous story of what happened in Rockland County. I'm sure you're familiar with the school district takeover, where, and this was a story, I think, in This American Life. Do you know?
That's right. Yeah, I heard that piece.
I would say it's one of the most popular pieces of media about the Hasidic community. It's the story of the school district takeover, where Hasidic Jews felt that they were paying school tax for public school they didn't benefit of. They got onto the school board, and they felt like they should have some kind of say in how the school district money was spent. And this caused problems with public school funding, and it became the huge controversy of the East Ramapo school district. Was there anything like that at play in Kiryas Joel, besides for the land expansion?
It does get complicated, and when you get into these kind of municipal accounting practices, the school district in Kiryas Joel it's different than Ramapo in that they have their own school district, which was controversial in its own right. There was a Supreme Court case in the 90s, I think, where people challenged whether the school district could be based on religious lines, essentially, whether that violated separation of church and state. And they ended up going up to the Supreme Court, and KJ essentially won the case. They had to make some modifications to the boundary. But so they're not, and this is something that was part of the annexation. They had to change the district lines. But there's not an overlap between kids from outside of KJ aren't going to school in KJ, and KJ isn't paying for school district money. So it is a cleaner split than in some other communities. So it avoids some of those problems where KJ really is responsible for their budget. Now, there's a lot of allegations about whether are they paying their fair share of taxes and getting money from the state they should be getting, and Medicare, and things like that. But in terms of like them versus their neighbors, it's a pretty clean split that avoids some of those other problems.
Interesting. I see. When I asked you what your favorite... I will
say one other thing, just watching this clip, it did remind me of is...
Yes, yeah.
This was before the, Trump-Clinton election, which I think laid bare a lot of the divisiveness in this country to a greater degree. But looking back on it now, I think you start to see not like the politics of like pro-Trump, anti-Trump, but one thing I started to notice as we were going on is that we are living in this society where there are these bubbles, and people who like live right next to each other, just wildly different worldviews. And that the way our culture is developing, you can just spend more and more time within your own bubble and be, fed from people who believe what you believe in news and information, and not see the other side. And I think that's what's happening in this country a lot, is that we do live more and more in these silos, information silos, cultural silos. And when there are moments the other side becomes much more the enemy, and that there's less of a common sense of like we have anything in common, and more of like I'm in my bubble, you're in your bubble, stay away from us. And I think looking back, like this meeting is a perfect example of that sort of mindset, which is, like you said, become part of the American fabric.
More so? You think it's becoming more so with time?
I mean, I just see the way like the internet and information and partisanship works. And I think, I do think, I don't know, maybe we'll get past the breaking point, but it feels like there is this sense of like, I'm going to identify with my group more than I'm going to identify with being a New Yorker or being an American, and I think, and that because of the way we can be more self-selecting and, we don't have to go out to a common space as much or get our news from a common space. So it's easier to just, kind of propagate who we're talking to, what we're talking to. And I do think that sort of hastens that sense of, pockets of identity as opposed to national identity.
On that note, there is one scene where two individuals try to step out of their bubbles. There's Max Hauer, who's Hasidic, and John, what's his last name? Do you remember? Allegro. Decide to meet and to come out of their bubbles. And I'm going to play a clip so then we can talk about it.
Great.
Hey, John.
Oh, Max.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
So good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it, too.
It's like the peace talks.
Not really. It's two friends talking among themselves, that's all.
So you grew up in KJ, right?
I grew up in KJ. I lived there until I got married, which was at age 20.
Right.
But my entire family still lives there. And my brother has a business actually in town of Monroe. My father also. Yeah, it's called Monroe Orthotics and Prosthetics. It's my brother and my father together. You probably know them.
George Tanner?
Of course.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. So your brother is George Tanner's partner?
He works with my brother, yeah.
Okay. Oh, all right. Yeah,
See,
sure.
close, small world, huh?
That was funny.
I know. It's great.
That was great. So how did you feel about this effort?
I mean, I felt like both Max and John are very sincere in everything they say here. I don't think either one of them is like trying to, go under false pretenses. And I think they both viewed themselves as, there were some people in each community who just wanted like, let's stay the hell away from the other side and like do our thing and get in battle mode. And I think they both believed more in engagement. I think John felt like that, he lived in the community for a while and he, had lived in close proximity to Satmar for a long time, and that can we kind of work it out more? I think he was like less, maybe like let's take to the barricades and some other people in United Monroe. And I think Max very much was someone who wanted people to understand the Satmar and wanted, felt like there was a lot of misunderstanding, misperceptions about them, and that he was someone who maybe could help, if people understood the Satmar better, then there would be less tension. So I think they both felt like engagement was a strategy that could, help find a path forward. But I think, they were, I'm trying to think if they met after one of the meetings, they met somewhere and then they wanted to meet to talk, and we said, great, can we come film it? And so, I think I think they both make good points here, right? I mean, I think they're two of the more kind of like articulate people for laying out the perspective. I think John, clearly feels that their community is being overrun by the amount of growth that's out of keeping with the community. And I think Max, feels that the anti-growth, that it's not just anti-growth, but it's anti-type of growth and it's anti-Hasidic growth. And that layered beneath a lot of the talk about like, we don't want to get too big, is a sense of we don't want too many Hasids here. We don't want to stop right here. And I think they're both right in a way. It's like one of those complicated things. Like they both have their points.
Yeah. By the way, did you watch the documentary on Canby Island in the UK?
No.
Oh, that's really good. It's worth watching because it deals with some of the same tensions. These Hasidim in the UK who live in Stamford Hill decide to start to move to Canby Island, which is like the most British of British places. And the locals decide to try to be tolerant and accepting. So there is an effort on both parts of let's try to understand each other. And there was a very funny scene. Well, to me, it was funny. I'm not sure that everyone would find it funny, where the locals set up a dinner so everyone can talk. And the Hasidim arrive like 2 hours later, as is the custom. And they're like, are they coming? Are they not coming? And that it already starts with this huge cultural chasm.
Yeah.
That you're trying to bridge. It's very endearing, and it leaves me, like with this documentary, with a sense of the strong challenge inherent in diversity. We like to think, oh, we'll all talk and we'll be one big happy family and there will be no problems, but there are very deep problems inherent in a diverse world that we just have to some degree live with and keep working on. And I feel like we see it in this discussion where, oh, is it major peace talks? The world is not going to be solved by people talking.
Right.
But it's sweet.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's right. And I think I think diversity, it has obviously a lot of benefits and it's created a lot of the rich aspects of the United States. But I think when you get, there's this trade-off, right? About, okay, we want diversity, but do the people who are, different have to sacrifice some of their culture and able to become part of the mainstream society? And are they comfortable doing that? And I think that's where you get this friction. It's like, well, are we going to just be cool with having people who are different than us? Or are we going to, is that, are there, because there might be legitimate disagreements. Like, to me, I'd spend a lot of time, again, as much as I filmed, I probably spent 3 times as much time just like talking to people, being up there, learning about people. And people, the more I learn, there's a lot to kind of respect and admire about Satmar culture. But one of the things that was always hard for me was the gender issue. And you get to this point where, just my own worldview and where I come from, it's like, if people don't have, men and women don't have equal opportunities and equal rights, then there's something unfair about that setup. And I can't tell you how many conversations I had about, we treat our women better because they don't have to work and we're going to show them respect. And I'm like, well, but they can't drive, they can't, there's a lot of things they can't do. And it's like, right, because that's like a form of protecting them or, honoring them. And to me at that point, I'm like, I can never get over that thing.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, is it a form of respect and honoring if the group that you're talking about doesn't have those privileges? And so, again, if I'm like kind of a more mainstream American view, like, does that gender issue just become a non-negotiable, or are you just going to be willing to be like, okay, like they treat women in a way that I don't feel comfortable with, and I don't know what the solution.
Yeah, and it's especially made powerful to me with a scene in the movie where a woman talks about feminism. I'm going to play it because I happen to like this scene a lot.
No, nothing.
This is the woman who left.
My mother was lost when she found out that I'm going out with a guy. One night, she locked me out. She changed the number on the lock, and she told me to go with my boyfriend. My boyfriend at the time was 17, and that feeling when I had nowhere to go, I was new to Brooklyn, I really didn't have many friends. I had no idea how the world works. I had to go out on my own, find a place to stay. It felt terrible, but if I'd be living in Kiryas Joel right now, I'd probably be expecting my 3rd child, cooking in the kitchen for my husband that I hardly ever talk to. I'd have no ways of expressing myself, of having a career that I want, of doing what I like, going where I want. And right now, my life is so much better than that, and I can't even imagine, like, my worst nightmare, being there and living that life.
Sorry, I couldn't resist letting this play. It's not what I was looking for.
I think the one you're looking
When I
for
see
with
out
Aya,
people
I think it's going to come.
trying to protect my rights, it makes me laugh. Do I look like a woman that's been suppressed? No, I don't. Was I afraid to get up and speak my mind? No, I wasn't. Did anyone tell me not to? Absolutely not. Okay, I'm a woman from the community. If I would need someone to help protect my rights, I would go and ask for it. And I really don't appreciate anyone saying that they're protecting my rights when indeed they're violating my rights of privacy.
Wow.
I thought that was a very powerful
Comment.
It was, and I thought it was important again to, I think the way we wanted to make the film was less coming down with conclusions. Here's the answer. Here's who's right and here's wrong, but questions, because it is so complicated, and that everyone does have their perspective and everyone's right in a way. People might be wrong in a way too, and let these sort of like different views exist in tension with each other. So there were a number. It was easier to find people who would criticize the gender issues within, or the gender politics and arrangements in Kiryas Joel. For me personally, it was really important to have a woman who was going to defend the way she lives and her lifestyle and her belief. And so we filmed this on and off over the course of 4 years. It was a real labor of love, this project. And part of it was we had to film until there was a resolution to the land battle, which just dragged on. But also, we met new people. And so Haya, who's the woman we just heard from there, I really felt like she was one of the last important kind of people in the film who we met. And we were like looking, and I don't think it would have been done until we found her or someone who could articulate that view, because just to have her coming from a position of real strength and to defend the way she lives up there and the way men and women treat each other up there, it's a reality that shapes a lot of their worldview, and so it just seemed like crucial to include in the film.
And also, we might say it's paternalistic to tell women you can't drive because in some way we're protecting you, but she's arguing the exact same thing. It's paternalistic to tell her what the right way for her to live her life, which I think is a strong point. I mean, if we really respect women, on the one hand, we should respect their desires. And on the other hand, issues of feminism are, of course, about a consciousness that goes deeper than the individual. I really, really like this because in my own world, I like to respect the experience of the individual. And I feel like we hear her experience. She expresses it so clearly. She's not asking anyone to project on her what their judgment of her life. And actually, in another scene, I was just looking through the documentary now before our talk. In another scene, she talks about infertility, which was really interesting. She's very candid about having struggled with infertility. And I found that also really interesting, that she expresses the tragedy in her world of not being able to have a large family, which is, of course, again, the other side of what might be our assumption of all these women having so many children.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think she really finds a lot of meaning in a sincere way in this sense of like part of having a good life and a meaningful life is having a big family. It's, as she says in the film, in her words, it's like kind of like trying to fill this wound from the Holocaust and trying to rebuild the community and the numbers. And there's a real sense of purpose that comes from that it's hard to deny. Like if someone, it's like she's not trying to hurt anyone. She's trying to, have a big family, live her life. And if she feels like these, rules about modesty create a more fulfilling lifestyle for her, it's hard to second guess it.
My husband and I struggled for many years to build our family, and it cost us a lot of money and a lot of aggravation. And I can tell you firsthand the pain of not having children, of not having a family. Not having children is just like in the Bible where we find where Rachel said to Jacob, "Give me a son or I'll be dead." Not having children is like feeling dead in the community.
It's a lot of food for thought for me. I love that. I love the tension that exists. That's, I think, what draws me to the film so much. I love the tension, which I think is very beautiful. When did you finish the film?
It's a good question. I think we finished the film, I want to say, like either in like 2018. It was either 2017 or 2018.
Got it.
When we finished the film.
I see. When did it come out? It's on Amazon now, right?
It's on Amazon. So I think it came out in 2019. I think we finished in 2018 and it came out in 2019. And we played a bunch of festivals and things like that. And then it came on Amazon. It was on PBS shortly, and then it was on Amazon, and it came out like either end of 2019 or beginning of 2020.
Did you keep up? Did you have an opportunity to return since you finished it, or is that you're on the next project?
I not in many years. I haven't been back to the village. Do you go back much?
I do because I have family events. Like I go to Paradise where I just had my brother's wedding.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And it's interesting to return to a place that changes so fast.
That's what I was going to ask. Does it feel different? Very
much. I think I might have a romantic view of Kiryas Joel.
Yep.
When I grew up there, which is many years ago, it had a very, we call fadefish, it had a village feel, you know? Now it's so many houses. And there are things that are foreign to me, like giant ads in the streets, like billboards.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. They're
well, I remember even when I was there, people were kind of bemoaning a little bit that it was losing that village feel, that they felt like some of the Hasidic people felt like, oh, like we moved here to get out of the city. And we used to like look out our back window and see trees and forests, and now we just see housing and housing and housing. So even some of them, I feel, the Satmar felt like some of the development was, beyond what they remember fondly about the village.
For sure. When I was a kid, we were taught in school that when the Messiah will come, he will collect Jews from the four corners of the world. And I lived at the end of Satmar Drive, and after our house, there was just deer and trees. So I always imagined that was one of the corners. That was where the world ended. One of the corners of Messiah will be collecting people, like a tablecloth you collect at the end of a night of a party. And I think a lot of people understand this is another source of tension. They want to live next to the synagogue. They want to live next to family. So the price for doing that is not having the quaint experience of Kiryas Joel. A part of what I appreciate in this documentary is that it is a time capsule of how it looks visually. That's a part of why I look back to it. I want to, sometimes in my work, I want to reference what Kiryas Joel looks and to trace how it's changing. And if you don't have filmmakers, then it changes so fast. Every 5 years, it looks completely different.
Right. Well, that's why I wonder, because looking back in the film, you see every other shot where it's outside, something's under construction. So I'd imagine that's all, populated now, and there's a whole new set of things under construction, I would guess.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what it's like. That's what it felt like to me when I was there recently.
Right.
Any final thoughts?
I hope people can watch the documentary, because I do think it's the type of topic, even talking with you, anytime you think you have your head wrapped around it, there's another layer to it. And I think that's why we structured it in a way like you just saw with that scene where you see alternating perspectives, that people take the time and maybe appreciate that there is this complexity of different viewpoints living next to each other, and maybe try to accept that in some way. Because whenever I tell people about the film, everyone, either whether they're Satmar or whether they're not Satmar, everyone wants to like, which side are you on? And I'm kind of like, well, do we have to take sides? Like, is there a way that we can, and I think this applies more to just this topic, but lots of topics. Is there a way we can maybe like try to appreciate this tension between these alternating views instead of turning it into like, who's the winner and who's the loser? Because I think we try to get that in the film, that it is like, it's not about being right or wrong. It's about trying to find some sort of like coexistence and equilibrium where there is maybe some wavelength that you're on with your neighbor.
I think that's very beautiful. Do you think that stories that have a defined villain and a defined hero sell better?
Much
Much better.
Oh, much better.
Much better.
Even when I was doing this, like I did some like crowdsourcing and some grants, and like whenever I tried to go to traditional like kind of media places, they'd say, well, exactly that. Like who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, and I didn't want to go down that path. And I think it's just like our brains handle those like, who's wearing the white hat, who's wearing the black hat type storytelling better.
And this is why this is so important. This kind of work is so important. I think I would hope I also do this kind of work. And even though it doesn't necessarily reach that kind of size of an audience, I think it's really, really, really important to live in that tension, to explore that tension, to let it be. So on that note, we can find the documentary on Amazon, right?
Yes.
Anywhere
it's on
else?
Amazon. I think Amazon's the place it's on now. I think that's this way.
Great. Anything else we should do a shout out for?
I have a very different documentary.
Tell us.
Coming out about the parole system on HBO called Nature of the Crime in December. And it's another complicated one where it's like very different perspectives about people who've committed serious crimes and are applying for parole, where it's filmed over a number of years. And that's called Nature of the Crime. It's going to be on HBO starting in December.
Oh, great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
We'll make sure to link all of this in the video description. Thank you so much, Jesse, for sharing so much, and to the viewers and podcast listeners. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.